Thank you very much, Kaylee. Let's bring in Noi Mahoney, who's got new details coming in along the lines of the DPS inspections happening at the Texas border, instituted by Governor Greg Abbott. And Noi, there's been some changes here, we hear.
Yes, cross-border trade in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas is slowly returning to normal after the month-long disruptions caused by a migrant surge and the additional cargo truck inspections by the Texas Department of Public Safety. But trucking officials in Mexico said it could take several weeks for trade flows to return to normal. Officials estimate that there is a backlog of about 25,000 export loads that still need to be processed and transported across the border.
So, Noi, with all of those loads that are backed up and needing to be transported, are they just in trucks and trailers that are just sitting at the edge of the border and can't be processed? Has the freight had to be taken off of the trailers, put into maybe temporary storage in warehouses and just hanging out there until it can be reprocessed? What's going on with that freight, and what type of headache does that mean for maybe your customs brokers or those folks who are actually working with the loads?
I believe the loads they're talking about, I should mention, trucking officials in Mexico held a press conference on Tuesday to talk about the disruptions and, the process that needs to going forward. And they mentioned the 25,000 loads. I think it's a mix of loads that you mentioned that still it's in warehouses. It needs to be moved from the warehouses to trucks and transported across the border. So it's still sitting in logistical places, and it needs to be, processed, customs processed and transported to the United States.
No, we really didn't get a good explanation, at least when the story really first popped up, from the Texas legislature or the governor's office there as well. Did we ever get an explanation as to why these inspections started in the first place, or any kind of an explanation as to why they stopped as well?
Texas DPS, they sort of put out the same statement every time they've done one of these, additional enhanced inspections. They've done it 4 times now in the past year and a half, and usually they put out a statement saying they're doing these inspections to deter cartel smuggling and activity, and it's sort of a broad statement. They don't really give specifics on, what they're doing or how they're trying to deter the cartel activity. As we mentioned before, they do these safety inspections. They can't check the cargo or cargo trailers, so it's really curious how these inspections, deter or slow down cartels. And they've never really, Texas Governor Greg Abbott hasn't put out any statements on, the effectiveness of these cargo truck inspections that they're doing. So it's a situation where they don't really answer very many questions or give additional details on how successful these operations have been.
So, Noi, we're starting to get some actual numbers on the economic impact of the freight that was stranded there in Mexico. One group reporting that $1.9 billion worth of goods have been stuck or have been delayed because of these increased inspections. Does that number seem pretty accurate? And are we seeing that in any of our data that we can track with these cross-border shipments? Is the value of that freight, or maybe the cost of moving that freight, or not moving the freight because it's not moving right now, that's been kind of stuck there?
It seems like it's a combination of the sort of things you just mentioned. It's the value of the freight. It's the additional cost of, fuel, overtime for truck drivers. It's a little bit of everything. And the trucking officials in Mexico said, these additional costs, it hurts both economies, in Mexico and Texas. And ultimately, these additional costs will be passed on to consumers, because a lot of the goods that they're transporting are automotive parts or, medical devices, things that consumers use. So these things are going to be, find their way into the regular economy and show up at maybe higher prices at, car lots and supermarkets.
So, Noi, are there any indication at all? Obviously, you sensed that there's going to take weeks for this to actually kind of fill its way out, and we'll get back to essentially business as normal. But any chance at all that we can see any of this perhaps be expedited just a bit in terms of how quickly this freight can get through, or are they just going to say, we were sorry about the inspections, we caused a delay, we're not going to do much about it?
As I said before, the Texas DPS and the governor's office here, Greg Abbott, they're not really forthcoming very often with information on why they do these inspections. I know during the press conference on Tuesday with the trucking officials in Mexico, they said they've, contacted Mexican authorities as well as Texas authorities and federal authorities here in the United States to try to urge them not to do these inspections again, at the Texas-Mexico border. They said the effect is very harmful, on the trucking industry as well as the economy for both countries. And they say it's also a safety issue because when you have these long lines of cargo trucks in Mexico waiting to cross the border into the U.S., they often become targets for cargo thieves because you have valuable cargo just sitting there out in the open. So the trucking officials in Mexico said, what can we do to make sure Texas doesn't do this again? But it's always up in the air because they never announce beforehand that they're going to do these, additional inspections. They just sort of spring up at, border crossings in El Paso, Laredo, Brownsville. So it's really a strange situation.
So, Noi, really quickly before we let you go, we got about a minute left. Obviously, this is kind of a pivotal time for Mexico as they're looking at now electing a new president. And this presidency, there we go, that's the word. The presidency will have, of course, a very heightened view on supply chain. Do we think that this could be an issue that the newly elected Mexican president could look at tackling, is relations with Texas specifically and making sure that they understand that supply chain is a priority for them and that they will do whatever it takes to make sure that that supply chain keeps moving?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been sort of looking at the presidential candidates. There's two main parties in Mexico, and the nominees for both of these parties, interestingly, are both women. So Mexico could have its first female president in its history. I think the presidential election is next year. Neither of the candidates have really given solid a look at what policies they have for international trade. The top candidate, a woman named Claudia Sheinbaum, she's the mayor of Mexico City right now. She is sort of aligned with the current president, Manuel Obrador, I believe. And so I would guess that her policies are going to be similar to Manuel Obrador's, the current president, which is to try to cooperate as much as possible with the United States to keep, trade flowing, to do whatever, it takes to make sure nearshoring isn't, affected, make sure that foreign investment keeps flowing into Mexico. So it'll be interesting to see, what the policies of both of these candidates will be going forward.
Obviously a really tough situation in there because when you have to stop a truck for 19 hours or so, you're obviously opening yourself up to cargo theft, as you mentioned, as well as basically also being there stuck overnight too. So hopefully this decision and the weeks to come, things are alleviated down the future. Noi, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.